Once upon a time, there was a boy named Emeka, a shy, round-faced Nigerian boy who had been pampered from birth. Born into a wealthy family, his parents lavished him with attention, gifts, and especially food. Growing up in their grand home in Lagos, they treated his every whim like a royal command. If Emeka wanted ice cream for breakfast, he got it. Pizza for lunch? It was there in minutes. As Emeka grew older, his weight increased, and while his parents saw it as a sign of their care, others began to see it as something to mock. One day, as Emeka made his way to school, his oversized uniform stretching uncomfortably across his round stomach, he noticed a group of boys. Tunde, the class bully, and his friends, standing near the entrance. Emeka had always been the target of their cruel jokes, but today felt different. Tunde's eyes lit up the moment he spotted Emeka. He whispered something to his friends, and they all erupted in laughter. As Emeka approached, his steps slow and awkward, Tunde stepped forward. "Look who's coming, fat Emeka. Better clear the hallway before he eats us all." The hallway filled with laughter, and Emeka froze. His cheeks burned with shame, and he stared down at his feet, pretending not to hear the cruel words. But the insults only grew louder. "Bet he can't even walk to class without getting tired," Tunde jeered. Emeka's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving. His stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the gnawing feeling of rejection that came with each cruel word. He found himself replaying his mother's voice in his head. "You are perfect just the way you are, my boy." But the words felt empty now. Emeka finally reached his class, where his friend Bola, a quiet, bookish girl with large glasses, sat waiting. She had been Emeka's only real friend, someone who never judged him for his size. The moment she saw him, she sensed something was wrong. "Emeka, are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He shook his head and sat down next to her, squeezing his large frame into the tiny school desk. They were at it again, he muttered, eyes on the floor. "I'm tired of this, Bola. Every day, it's the same thing." Bola reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "Don't let them get to you. They're just bullies. They don't know the real you. But what if they're right?" Emeka said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "What if I really am just fat?" Before Bola could respond, the teacher walked in, and the class began. But Emeka's mind was elsewhere. The mocking voices of Tunde and his gang echoed in his head, replaying over and over again. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the lesson, all he could think about was the way people looked at him, the way they laughed behind his back. He felt trapped, stuck in a body that made him a target for ridicule. Later that day, during lunch, Emeka sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, pushing his food around on his tray. His appetite had disappeared, replaced by a deep sadness. Across the room, he saw Tunde and his friends, still laughing, still mocking him. He turned away, pretending not to notice, but it was no use. The feeling of being an outcast was overwhelming. Back at home, things were different. His parents, Chief and Madam Okoro, doted on him endlessly, never once acknowledging his weight or the way people treated him because of it. "Eat up, my boy. You're growing strong," his father would say, handing him another serving of food. His mother, always ready with a plate of Emeka's favorite dishes, would smile proudly, oblivious to the struggles her son faced outside the walls of their home. But even at home, Emeka couldn't escape his thoughts. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table, staring at the mountain of food in front of him, something shifted inside him. He wasn't hungry anymore. He was tired, tired of the jokes, tired of feeling like he didn't belong. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice hesitant, "I think we need to talk." His parents exchanged confused glances but nodded for him to continue. I'm not happy," Emeka admitted, his voice shaking. "At school, everyone makes fun of me because of how I look, and I don't know if I can take it anymore." His mother's face softened, and his father frowned, setting down his fork. "But, "Son, we love you just the way you are," his father said gently. "Why should you care what others think?" "I care because it hurts," Emeka replied, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I can't even walk into class without being laughed at. And I don't think I'm happy with myself either." His mother reached across the table and took his hand. "Oh, Emeka, we didn't know. We never wanted to make you feel this way." Emeka swallowed hard, tears welling in his eyes. "I just want to feel normal." That night, as Emeka lay in bed, his thoughts swirling, he realized that things had to change. He couldn't continue living this way, trapped in a cycle of indulgence and ridicule. But the path ahead wasn't clear. How could he change his life when everything he knew had been built around his parents' pampering? And worse, how could he face the constant torment of his classmates, who saw him as nothing more than an easy target? The next day at school, Emeka sat quietly at his desk, trying to tune out the snickering voices that followed him everywhere. Tunde and his gang, as usual, had started their daily round of taunts and jabs the moment they saw him walk into class. But today, Emeka felt different. Yesterday's conversation with his parents lingered in his mind. He didn't want to be this version of himself anymore. After school, as Emeka walked home, he overheard some boys talking about the gym. Not just any gym, the Titan's Den, where all the toughest, most muscular boys from school trained. He had seen them walking around campus before, with their broad shoulders and chiseled arms. They were admired and respected. No one dared to make fun of them. "That's where the real men go," one of the boys boasted to his friend. "Tunde goes there every day. It's why no one messes with him." Emeka's ears perked up at the mention of Tunde. He knew that if he wanted to stand up to his bully, he would have to change more than just his attitude. He would have to change his body. That night, Emeka tossed and turned in bed, the thought of the Titan's Den filling his mind. Could this be the answer he had been looking for? If he went there, maybe he could transform into one of those muscular boys who commanded respect. But something about it felt off. A small voice in the back of his mind warning him that it wouldn't be easy. The next day, after school, Emeka made a decision. He was going to the gym. He didn't tell his parents. They wouldn't understand. His mother would probably try to convince him he didn't need to go, and his father might laugh it off, thinking it was just a phase. No, this was something he had to do alone. Later that evening, he found himself standing in front of the Titan's Den. The building looked imposing, with its dark, tinted windows and large steel doors. Emeka hesitated for a moment before walking in. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and the sound of clanging weights. The room was dimly lit, with heavy equipment scattered across the floor, and muscular boys grunting as they lifted barbells. Emeka felt small, smaller than ever before. He caught a glimpse of Tunde in the corner of the gym, surrounded by his usual gang of boys. They all looked like they had stepped out of a bodybuilder magazine, each one more ripped than the last. Tunde spotted Emeka almost immediately and smirked. Well, look who's here," Tunde said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's Fat Emeka doing in the Titan's Den? You lose your way, bro." His friends laughed, the sound echoing in the cavernous gym. Emeka's heart raced, but he stood his ground. "I'm here to work out," Emeka said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Same as everyone else." Tunde raised an eyebrow. "Work out? You? Man, this place isn't for people like you. This is where the strong get stronger. What do you think you're gonna do? Lift a dumbbell and suddenly become one of us?" More laughter erupted from Tunde's gang, but Emeka clenched his fists. "You'll see," he muttered under his breath, turning away from the group. Emeka walked over to a corner of the gym, where the equipment wasn't as intimidating. He started small, lifting light weights, keeping to himself. But every now and then, he could feel the eyes of Tunde and his gang on him, mocking him silently. Still, he pushed through the discomfort, determined to change his life. As the days passed, Emeka returned to the Titan's Den every day after school. At first, the pain was unbearable. His muscles ached in ways he had never experienced before. But with each passing day, he grew stronger. He started to notice small changes in his body. His arms, once soft and flabby, were beginning to show signs of muscle. His legs, once weak, felt firmer. But more than the physical change, Emeka felt a new sense of determination growing inside him. However, the gym was not the easy solution he thought it would be. It was a dark place, filled with toxic energy. The boys who trained there weren't just looking to get stronger. They were obsessed with power, with dominance. The more Emeka spent time there, the more he realized that the gym wasn't just about fitness. It was about control, about being the one on top. And Tunde was the king of this world. One afternoon, Emeka overheard a conversation between Tunde and his gang that sent a chill down his spine. "Man, Emeka's been coming here for weeks," one of Tunde's friends said. "He's getting kinda serious." Tunde snorted. "Yeah, but it doesn't matter how much he lifts. He'll never be one of us. You can't change what's inside. He's weak. Always has been. Always will be." The words hit Emeka harder than any weight he had ever lifted. He realized that no matter how much his body changed, in Tunde's eyes, he would always be that fat, weak boy. And maybe Tunde was right. Maybe lifting weights wasn't enough to change who he was inside. But Emeka wasn't ready to give up. One day, as he was working out, Bola came by the gym to see him. She hadn't seen him in weeks, and when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, she frowned. "Emeka, what are you doing to yourself?" she asked, concerned. "You don't look happy." "I'm fine," Emeka lied, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is what I need to do." "But at what cost?" Bola asked, her eyes searching his face. "You've changed, Emeka. And not in a good way." Emeka shrugged her off. "This is the only way, Bola. I need to get stronger. I need to show them I'm not weak." "But you're becoming like them," Bola said softly. "Is that what you want?" Emeka froze at her words, but before he could respond, Tunde and his gang approached them. Tunde clapped his hands together, his grin wide and menacing. "Looks like Fat Emeka's got himself a cheerleader," Tunde sneered. "What's next, Emeka? You gonna ask her to spot you while you lift your tiny weights?" Bola glared at Tunde. "Leave him alone, Tunde." Tunde chuckled darkly. "Oh, I don't think so. This is my gym. And Emeka? He's just playing dress-up. He doesn't belong here." Before Emeka could react, Tunde stepped closer, his face inches away from Emeka's. "You think lifting weights is gonna change who you are? You think you can be one of us?" he whispered harshly. "You're pathetic." For the first time, Emeka didn't flinch. He stared back at Tunde, anger boiling inside him. "I'm not trying to be one of you," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to be better than who I was." Tunde's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, stepping back with a shrug. "Whatever, man. Keep dreaming." As Tunde and his gang walked away, Bola looked at Emeka, worry etched on her face. "This place, it's changing you," she whispered. Emeka didn't respond, but deep down, he knew she was right. The gym had become a dark rabbit hole, one that he wasn't sure he could crawl out of. Emeka returned to the Titan's den every day, but something felt off. The gym had become more than just a place for physical training. There was a strange undercurrent he couldn't shake. The more time he spent with Tunde and his gang, the more he sensed that their loyalty to each other ran deeper than just lifting weights. They would huddle together in whispers, their voices too low for anyone else to hear. Their late-night trips, their secretive meetings, they weren't just about the gym. Something darker was at play. One day, as Emeka was leaving the gym, he saw Tunde and his gang in a heated discussion. They didn't notice him lurking nearby, so he eavesdropped. "Everything's set for tomorrow night," Tunde said in a low voice. "No one suspects a thing. We'll hit the warehouse after midnight. Quick and clean." Emeka's heart raced. He realized with a sickening clarity what was happening. Tunde and his crew weren't just gym brothers. They were criminals. Armed robbers. He stumbled back, accidentally kicking a weight that clanged loudly against the floor. The noise alerted Tunde, who turned sharply. "Who's there?" he barked. Emeka froze, his heart hammering in his chest. There was no escaping now. Tunde's cold eyes locked onto him. "Oh, it's you," Tunde sneered, walking toward him. His gang followed, surrounding Emeka like vultures. "Eavesdropping, huh?" Emeka swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I didn't mean to." Tunde's expression darkened. "You've been hanging around us for a while now, Emeka. Think you're one of us?" Emeka hesitated, knowing the weight of his answer. If he backed out now, if he showed fear, Tunde would never let him live it down. His entire journey to prove that he wasn't weak would crumble. Peer pressure weighed down on him like an anchor, suffocating him. "Yeah," Emeka said, his voice shaking slightly. "I want in." Tunde raised an eyebrow, surprised but clearly intrigued. His smirk returned. "You want in? You don't even know what you're getting yourself into, fat boy. This isn't a game." "I'm serious," Emeka insisted, despite the fear bubbling in his stomach. "I'm tired of being the joke. I'm tired of people like you thinking I'm soft. I can do it." Tunde's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Fine," he said, clapping a hand on Emeka's shoulder. "We'll see what you're made of. Meet us tomorrow night, 11:30, behind the gym. You're either in, or you're out for good." The gang dispersed, leaving Emeka standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he just done? That evening, Emeka walked home in a daze, his mind racing. He was about to get involved in something dangerous, something criminal. But a part of him, the part that had been mocked and ridiculed his whole life, felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. This would prove them all wrong. He wasn't the spoiled, fat child everyone thought he was. The next day at school, Emeka could barely focus. Bola noticed his distracted state and pulled him aside during lunch. "What's going on, Emeka?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've been acting strange for weeks now." Emeka avoided her gaze. "Nothing. I'm just busy with the gym." Bola wasn't convinced. "It's not just the gym. You're not the same. I know something's wrong." Emeka sighed, knowing he couldn't keep it from her. Bola was the only friend who had stuck by him through everything. She deserved the truth. "I overheard something," Emeka said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Tunde and his gang, they're not just gym rats. They're criminals. Armed robbers." Bola's eyes widened. "What? And you're still hanging around them?" "I didn't have a choice." Emeka snapped, the pressure building inside him. "I've been trying to fit in, Bola. I've been trying to prove I'm not weak. But this is insane, Emeka," Bola exclaimed, lowering her voice when she saw how upset he was. "You can't get involved with them. You'll ruin your life." Emeka bit his lip. "I already told them I'm in. It's too late to back out now." Bola shook her head, her face pale with worry. "No, it's not. You can still get out of this. Tell someone. Your parents, the police, anyone." "I can't," Emeka said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I back out now, they'll know I'm weak. They'll never let me live it down." "Emeka, this isn't about being weak or strong. This is about your life," Bola said, her voice pleading. "Don't throw it all away because of Tunde." Emeka looked away, torn. He wanted to believe Bola, but the pressure to prove himself was too great. He had spent his whole life being the butt of everyone's jokes. This was his chance to turn the tables, to show everyone that he wasn't just a fat kid who got pushed around. "I'll be fine," he said, trying to convince himself more than Bola. "I'll handle it." Bola looked at him with a mixture of fear and frustration. "I'm not letting you do this alone," she said firmly. "I'll be there tomorrow night. I'll stop you if I have to." Emeka shook his head. "Bola, don't get involved." But Bola's mind was made up. "I'm not letting you throw your life away, Emeka." That night, Emeka lay in bed, unable to sleep. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. Tomorrow night would change everything. He would either prove himself or fall deeper into a darkness he wasn't sure he could escape from. The next evening, Emeka found himself standing behind the gym at 11:30, just as Tunde had instructed. The night was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. Tunde and his gang arrived, their faces set in grim determination. "You ready for this?" Tunde asked, sizing Emeka up. Emeka nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. "Yeah, let's do it." Tunde smirked. "Good. You're gonna be the lookout. Don't mess this up, or you'll regret it." As they walked toward the warehouse, Bola appeared out of the shadows, her eyes wide with fear. "Emeka, don't do this," she begged. "It's not too late to back out." Tunde's eyes narrowed. "What's she doing here?" Emeka felt a surge of panic. "She's just a friend. She won't cause any trouble." Tunde stepped forward, his face inches from Bola's. "You better hope not. If you mess this up, it's on both of you." Bola glared at Tunde but didn't say anything. She looked at Emeka, her eyes pleading with him to stop. But it was too late. The gang was already moving, and Emeka was caught in the current. As they approached the warehouse, Emeka's heart raced. He could feel the danger creeping closer with every step. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was life or death. Bola stayed close to Emeka, her hands trembling. "Please, Emeka, don't do this," she whispered. But Emeka couldn't turn back now. He had come too far. Tunde and his gang broke into the warehouse with ease, moving like professionals. Emeka stood outside, keeping watch as they ransacked the place, stuffing stolen goods into bags. His heart pounded in his chest, his nerves on edge. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Panic erupted among the gang. "Cops!" one of Tunde's friends yelled. Tunde's face twisted in anger. "I thought you said no one would see us." Emeka's blood ran cold. I didn't." Before he could explain, Tunde grabbed him by the collar. "This is your fault," he snarled. Bola grabbed Emeka's arm. "We have to go. Now!" But it was too late. The police were closing in, and Emeka realized with horror that there was no escape. The night felt like a blur of chaos and fear. As the police sirens wailed louder, Emeka's heart pounded in his ears. He could barely hear Bola over the panic surging through his veins. Her grip on his arm was tight, pulling him away from the warehouse as Tunde's gang scattered into the shadows. But not everyone was fast enough. Gunshots rang out in the night, shattering the air with terrifying force. Emeka glanced back, seeing one of Tunde's men crumple to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Another thug was tackled by the police, the sound of handcuffs clicking around his wrists. "We need to run," Bola screamed, yanking Emeka with all her strength. The sirens were getting closer, but there was still a narrow alley that led away from the chaos. Without thinking, Emeka followed her. His legs felt heavy, weighed down by terror and guilt, but he kept running. The pounding footsteps of the police grew distant, and soon they were swallowed by the maze of narrow streets. Emeka's breath came in sharp gasps as they finally collapsed behind a wall, hidden from view. They sat there for what felt like hours, barely able to speak. Bola was shaking, her face pale. "Emeka, that was too close. We could have been caught. Or killed." Emeka couldn't find his voice. His mind replayed the sound of the gunshots, the flash of blue and red lights, the sight of Tunde's men being dragged away. How had it come to this? He wasn't a criminal. He never wanted this. But now, he was deep in it, and there was no way to turn back. "We need to go home," Bola finally whispered. "Before anyone sees us." Emeka nodded numbly. Together, they made their way back through the dark streets, slipping quietly into the night. The next morning at school, Emeka was barely functioning. His body moved on autopilot, his thoughts still stuck on what had happened the night before. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But he knew it wouldn't be long before he saw Tunde. And he was right. By lunch break, Tunde cornered him near the lockers, his face twisted in a cold smirk. He didn't waste any time. "You think you can just walk away from what happened?" Tunde hissed, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Some of my boys are in jail right now, thanks to you." Emeka swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't." "You didn't what?" Tunde interrupted, stepping closer, his voice a low growl. You didn't mean to mess everything up? Because you did. And now, if you even think about telling anyone what happened, I'll make sure you regret it. Emeka's stomach turned. He could feel the threat behind Tunde's words. This wasn't a schoolyard fight. This was serious. If he talked, if he let anyone know about the robbery, Tunde would come for him. And he wasn't alone. His gang was still out there, even if some of them had been caught. The others would do anything to protect themselves. Bola appeared at Emeka's side, her face set in a hard glare. Leave him alone, Tunde, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. He's not going to say anything. You don't need to keep threatening him. Tunde sneered at her. You think you can protect him? You don't know what you're dealing with. I know enough, Bola shot back. Just stay away from him. For a moment, Tunde stared at them, his gaze cold and calculating. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, but not before flashing Emeka a look that promised more trouble. The rest of the day passed in a haze of tension. Emeka couldn't focus on anything except Tunde's warning. Every glance from across the classroom felt like a threat. Every shadow in the hallways made him jump. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that at any moment, Tunde or one of his gang members could strike. Bola tried to reassure him. Tunde's just trying to scare you, she said as they sat under a tree during the break. If you don't say anything, they'll leave you alone. Emeka shook his head. It's not that simple. They're not just going to let this go. So what are you going to do? Bola asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. Emeka didn't have an answer. He couldn't go to the police. Tunde would come after him. But staying silent meant living in fear, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And worst of all, he felt trapped. He had been trying to prove himself, to show that he wasn't weak. But now he was more vulnerable than ever. I don't know, Emeka finally said, his voice hollow. I don't know. Days passed, and the tension didn't ease. Emeka avoided Tunde and his gang at all costs, but the pressure was unbearable. He had no choice but to show up at school every day, where he was constantly reminded of what had happened. The weight of it all was suffocating him. One afternoon, as Emeka was heading home, he noticed a car idling on the street corner near his house. He tried to ignore it, but his heart raced when he saw Tunde sitting in the driver's seat, watching him. Tunde's message was clear. There was no escaping this. Emeka quickly walked inside, shutting the door behind him. He leaned against it, his hands shaking. The walls were closing in. The tension between Emeka and Tunde's gang had reached a boiling point. It was like a noose tightening around Emeka's neck, growing more suffocating with each passing day. No matter where he went, Emeka could feel Tunde's eyes on him, waiting for the moment he would crack under the pressure. But the worst was yet to come. The police investigation into the warehouse robbery had escalated, and whispers were beginning to circulate through the halls of the school. The boys that had been caught were recognized as students from City High College. It didn't take long for word to get out. Emeka was seen hanging around them, always in the company of Tunde. The rumors were spreading like wildfire, and soon, the police had arrived at the school to question the students. Emeka could sense that his time was running out. He had hoped to stay under the radar, to disappear into the background, but it was impossible now. The walls were closing in on him, and his secrets were threatening to tear everything apart. That morning, Emeka was sitting in class when the principal's voice came over the intercom. His heart sank as he heard his name. Emeka Olamide, please report to the principal's office immediately. The class fell silent, and Emeka could feel the weight of 100 eyes on him. He stood slowly, his legs trembling as he made his way to the door. Bola shot him a worried glance, but there was nothing she could say to ease his fear. As Emeka walked through the hallway, his mind raced with panic. Had someone snitched? Did the police know everything already? His thoughts spiraled, and by the time he reached the principal's office, he was convinced his life was over. When he opened the door, the sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. The principal was seated behind his desk, but standing beside him were two police officers. Their serious expressions left no room for doubt. this wasn't a routine visit. "Sit down, Emeka," the principal said, his tone unreadable. Emeka sat, his palms sweating as the officers looked him over. "Emeka, we have a situation," one of the officers began, leaning forward. "We've been investigating the robbery that took place at the warehouse recently. Several individuals involved in that robbery were identified as students from this school." The other officer spoke up. "We've also received information that suggests you were seen with these individuals in the days leading up to the robbery. We need you to come down to the station and answer a few questions." Emeka's heart pounded in his chest. His mouth was dry, and it felt like the walls were closing in on him. I don't know anything about the robbery," Emeka stammered, his voice shaking. "I swear, I wasn't involved." The officers exchanged glances, and the principal leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Emeka, this is serious," the principal said. "If you know anything about what happened, you need to tell the truth. The consequences of lying could be severe." "I'm not lying," Emeka insisted, his voice rising in panic. "I didn't have anything to do with it." The officers didn't seem convinced, but they didn't push him further. Instead, they handed him a card. "Emeka, we'll give you a little time to think about things," the first officer said. "But we want you to come to the station by the end of the week. If you don't, we'll have to take further action." Emeka nodded numbly, taking the card with trembling hands. The weight of their warning pressed down on him like a heavy burden, and as he left the office, he felt like he was walking to his own execution. After school, Bola caught up with Emeka as he trudged toward the gate. She could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Emeka couldn't find the words. The fear and guilt were eating away at him, and all he could do was shake his head. Bola grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. "Emeka, talk to me," she urged. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." Emeka finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with helplessness. "They're onto me, Bola. The police. They want me to come in for questioning about the robbery." Bola's eyes widened in shock. "What? But you didn't do anything. You can't just let them pin this on you." Emeka frowned, sensing something was wrong. "What's going on?" Bola bit her lip, her eyes filled with fear. "I overheard Tunde talking to some of his guys. They're planning something big. They want to frame you as the leader of the gang. They're going to plant evidence and make sure the police think you're the one behind everything." Emeka's heart sank. He had known Tunde wouldn't give up easily, but this was worse. They don't care," Emeka said, his voice breaking. "They think I'm part of Tunde's gang, and if I go to the station, they'll make me confess to something I didn't do." Bola was silent for a moment, her mind racing as she tried to think of a solution. "We need to figure this out, Emeka. There has to be a way to prove you're innocent." Before they could say anything else, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and the door swung open. Tunde stepped out, his face twisted in a smug grin. Well, if it isn't the fat boy and his little girlfriend," Tunde sneered, sauntering over to them. "Heard the police are looking for you, Emeka. Guess they finally realized you're not as innocent as you pretend to be." Emeka clenched his fists, trying to keep his anger in check. "I'm not going to let you pin this on me, Tunde." "Oh, but you don't have a choice, do you?" Tunde's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. "See, the cops already know who did it. They just need someone to take the fall. And you, my friend, are the perfect scapegoat." Bola stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "You can't do this, Tunde. Emeka had nothing to do with that robbery, and you know it." Tunde's smile faded, and his expression darkened. "Watch your mouth, Bola. You don't know who you're messing with." Before Bola could respond, one of Tunde's gang members stepped out of the car, grabbing her by the arm. She yelped in surprise, struggling to break free. "What are you doing? Let me go!" Bola screamed, but the thug held her tightly. "Here's the deal, Emeka," Tunde said, his voice cold and calculating. "You go to the police and tell them you were the gang leader. Take the blame for everything, and Bola stays safe. Refuse, and Well, I'm sure you can imagine what happens next. Emeka's blood ran cold. His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at Tunde, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not Bola. Not her. Tunde, please, Emeka begged, his voice trembling. Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with any of this. Tunde shook his head, his expression pitiless. You don't get to make demands, Emeka. This is how it's going to be. You confess, or she pays the price. Emeka was paralyzed with fear. He knew he couldn't let anything happen to Bola, but the thought of going to the police, of lying and condemning himself to a future behind bars, was terrifying. Emeka, don't listen to him, Bola said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We'll figure this out. Don't let him control you. But Tunde's thug tightened his grip on Bola, and she winced in pain. Time's ticking, Emeka, Tunde said, his voice cold and unfeeling. What's it going to be? Emeka's mind raced. If he went to the police and confessed, his life would be over. But if he didn't, Bola's life was at risk. The weight of the decision crushed him, and for a moment, he didn't know what to do. Suddenly, another car screeched to a halt beside them. Emeka looked up, and to his surprise, it was Bola's older brother, Kola, stepping out of the vehicle. His face was a mask of fury as he stormed toward Tunde and his gang. What the hell do you think you're doing? Kola shouted, his voice booming with authority. Let go of my sister. The thug holding Bola released her immediately, stepping back as Kola approached. Tunde's expression shifted, a flicker of fear crossing his face. This isn't over, Emeka, Tunde hissed, glaring at him before motioning for his gang to get back into the car. You'll pay for this. With that, Tunde and his gang sped off, leaving Emeka and Bola standing in the street, shaken but unharmed. Kola turned to Emeka, his eyes narrowing. We need to talk. Now. Back at Bola's house, Kola wasted no time grilling Emeka about what had happened. He had been suspicious of Tunde and his gang for a while, but this was the first time they had made such a bold move. Tell me everything, Emeka, Kola said, his voice serious. I need to know what we're dealing with. Emeka hesitated, but there was no use in hiding the truth anymore. He told Kola everything, from the moment he started hanging out with Tunde, to the robbery at the warehouse, to the threats Tunde had made against him and Bola. Kola listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. When Emeka finished, Kola let out a heavy sigh. You've gotten yourself into a mess, Emeka, Kola said. But you're not alone in this. We're going to find a way to bring Tunde down without you taking the fall. Emeka was grateful for Kola's support, but he still felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But how? Tunde has connections. He's not going to go down easily. Kola's eyes hardened. Leave that to me. I know some people who can help. We'll expose Tunde for what he really is, and you won't have to go to jail for something you didn't do. Emeka nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. But he knew that the road ahead was still dangerous, and Tunde wasn't going to back down without a fight. The next few days were a whirlwind of tension and planning. Kola had reached out to some contacts in law enforcement, and they were working on building a case against Tunde and his gang. But the situation was still precarious. The police were getting closer to identifying the students involved in the robbery, and Emeka knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. One afternoon, as Emeka sat in the school library trying to focus on his homework, Bola slipped into the seat beside him. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. Emeka, we need to talk, she whispered, glancing around nervously. He had imagined. We have to stop them, Bola continued, her voice shaking. If they go through with this, you'll be arrested. You'll go to jail. Emeka's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He couldn't let Tunde get away with this, but how could he fight back without putting himself in even more danger? We need to tell Kola, Emeka said, his voice firm. He'll know what to do. But before they could make a move, the library door swung open, and Tunde sauntered in, flanked by two of his gang members. His eyes locked onto Emeka and Bola, and a cruel smile spread across his face. Well, look who we have here, Tunde said, his voice dripping with mockery. The fat boy and his little girlfriend, plotting against me. How adorable. Emeka stood up, his fists clenched. You won't get away with this, Tunde. We know what you're planning. Tunde chuckled darkly, stepping closer. You think you can stop me, Emeka? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. Just a spoiled little fat kid trying to prove himself. But guess what? You're in over your head. Emeka didn't flinch. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. He had something Tunde didn't. Support. People who cared about him. And he wasn't going to let Tunde take that away. I'm not scared of you anymore, Tunde, Emeka said, his voice steady. You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not going down without a fight. Tunde's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. You'll regret this, Emeka. Mark my words. With that, Tunde and his gang turned and left the library, leaving Emeka and Bola standing there, the weight of the situation settling over them. But despite the fear, Emeka felt a new sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let Tunde control him any longer. It was time to take a stand, no matter the cost. The days following Tunde's threat weighed heavily on Emeka's shoulders, but with every passing moment, his resolve only hardened. The fear that had once crippled him was now replaced with a burning determination. Tunde had pushed him too far, and it was time to fight back, not just for himself, but for everyone Tunde and his gang had hurt. As Emeka sat in the quiet of his room, his mind raced with a plan. If Tunde thought he could bully Emeka into submission, he had underestimated him. It was time to gather those who had suffered in silence, just like him. Tunde's reign of terror had to end, and Emeka knew he couldn't do it alone. The next day at school, Emeka made his rounds quietly, pulling aside the boys who had been bullied, threatened, and harassed by Tunde and his gang. They were everywhere, sitting in the cafeteria, studying in the library, hanging out by the basketball court. Each of them wore the same haunted look, a reflection of the torment they had endured. One by one, Emeka approached them, speaking in hushed tones about his plan. Some were hesitant at first, scared of the repercussions, but when they saw the fire in Emeka's eyes, they knew things had changed. This wasn't the same Emeka who had cowered in the shadows, hiding behind his insecurities. This was someone determined to stand up, not just for himself, but for them all. By the end of the day, Emeka had a small army of boys ready to take on Tunde and his gang. They met that evening after school, in the back corner of the school field, far away from prying eyes. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of their decision palpable. I can't believe we're doing this, whispered Jide, a skinny boy with glasses who had been one of Tunde's frequent targets. Tunde's not going to let us get away with this. He'll come after us. He can't come after all of us, Emeka said firmly, standing in the center of the group. We're stronger together. For too long, we've let Tunde push us around. It's time we push back. A murmur of agreement spread through the group, though the fear was still evident in their eyes. Emeka could see it, but he also knew that fear was the very thing they had to overcome. His taken Bola, Emeka continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I won't let him hurt her, but we have to be smart about this. We can't just rush in and expect to win. He outlined his plan, detailing how they would ambush Tunde's gang the next time they gathered at their secret spot behind the gym. He'd been watching them, noting their routines, and he knew exactly when they'd be most vulnerable. It was risky, but it was their best shot. As the boys listened, some of them began to speak up, offering suggestions, fine-tuning the plan. For the first time, they felt like they had power to fight back, to reclaim their dignity. We'll take them down, Emeka said, looking each of them in the eyes. But after that, we have to do the right thing. We have to report them to the police. There was a silence, a shared glance between the boys. Reporting Tunde and his gang was dangerous. The consequences could be severe. But Emeka had made up his mind. This was the only way to end it once and for all. The night of the ambush was tense. Emeka and the other boys waited in the shadows behind the gym, watching as Tunde and his gang gathered to plan their next move. Bola was still missing, and Tunde's threats echoed in Emeka's mind. He had to end this tonight. Tunde, oblivious to the danger, leaned against the wall, laughing with his cronies. They talked about how they had the upper hand, how Emeka was too weak to fight back. But they didn't know what was coming. As the last of Tunde's gang members arrived, Emeka signaled the boys to move in. They surrounded the group, cutting off any possible escape routes. Tunde, realizing what was happening, stood up, his face twisting in anger. "What the hell is this, Emeka?" Tunde snarled, stepping forward. "You think you can take me on? You think these losers can save you?" Emeka stood his ground, meeting Tunde's gaze without flinching. "It's over, Tunde. You've terrorized us long enough." Tunde's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed like he might try to fight his way out. But the sheer number of boys surrounding him made it clear that resistance was futile. "You'll regret this," Tunde hissed. "All of you." Emeka didn't respond. He didn't need to. The boys moved in, disarming Tunde's gang of the weapons they had been carrying, and subdued them quickly. There was no violence, just a silent, calculated takedown that left Tunde and his gang powerless. With the job done, Emeka turned to the group. "We're going to the police. We'll tell them everything." The walk to the police station was tense. Bola had been found, unharmed but shaken, and she walked beside Emeka, her hand gripping his tightly. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can let them take the blame. You don't have to go down with them." Emeka shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "I do, Bola. I was part of this. I let myself get dragged into it. And I have to take responsibility." Bola's eyes filled with tears. "I can't lose you, Emeka. You've changed so much. I don't want you to go to jail." Emeka stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'll be okay. I have to do this. For us. For everyone." Bola bit her lip, the tears spilling over as she looked up at him. "I love you, Emeka. I've always loved you." Emeka's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to say it, and for a moment, he was speechless. But then he pulled her close, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was filled with all the emotions they had kept buried for so long. It was a kiss of love, of hope, and of the future they wanted to build together. When they pulled apart, Emeka smiled softly, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I love you too, Bola. And I promise, I'll come back to you." At the police station, Emeka and the boys told the truth. They explained everything, from the bullying to the robbery, to the kidnapping and the threats. Emeka didn't leave anything out, even when it meant admitting his own involvement in the gang's activities. He was ready to face the consequences. Tunde and his gang were brought in shortly after, cuffed and furious. Tunde glared at Emeka with venom in his eyes, but there was nothing he could do. His reign of terror was over. After hours of questioning, the police finally made their decision. Because of Emeka's cooperation and his role in bringing down the gang, they decided to let him go. Tunde, however, was not so lucky. He and his gang would be facing serious charges, and it was clear they wouldn't be returning to school anytime soon. As Emeka left the station, Bola was waiting for him outside, her face lighting up with relief when she saw him. "You did it," she said, running to him and wrapping her arms around him. "You're free." Emeka hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. "We did it," he corrected her, smiling. "I couldn't have done this without you." Back at home, Emeka knew there was one last thing he had to do. He found his parents sitting in the living room, their faces filled with concern after hearing about everything that had happened. "Mom, Dad," Emeka began, his voice firm but respectful. "We need to talk." His parents exchanged glances, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "I know you love me, and I know you've always tried to protect me," Emeka said, his eyes locking with theirs. "But you've also spoiled me, and it made me weak. It made me vulnerable to people like Tunde." His mother looked stricken, but his father nodded slowly, realizing the truth in Emeka's words. "I don't blame you," Emeka continued. "But I need you to understand that I'm not a child anymore. I need to be strong on my own. I need to learn how to face challenges without always relying on you to fix things." His parents were silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Then his father spoke, his voice filled with regret. "You're right, Emeka. We've failed you in some ways, but we're proud of the man you're becoming." His mother reached out, tears in her eyes. "We love you, Emeka. We just wanted to protect you." Emeka smiled softly, taking her hand. "I know, but from now on, I need to stand on my own 2 feet." The next day at school, Emeka walked through the halls with his head held high. Tunde and his gang were gone, and the air felt lighter, freer. The boys who had once been bullied now walked with a sense of pride, no longer afraid of what lurked around the corner. And as Emeka met Bola's gaze across the courtyard, he knew that things were going to be different from now on. He had faced his demons, fought his battles, and come out stronger. Together, he and Bola would face whatever challenges life threw their way. For the first time in his life, Emeka felt truly free. Free from the past, free from the weight of his insecurities, and free to live the life he wanted. And as he and Bola walked hand in hand into the future, Emeka knew that no matter what came next, he was ready.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel Folktales King so that you won't miss any of our new videos. Here is another story I'm sure you will enjoy. Click on it to watch now.